Risa, it's so great to have you on the show today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm really excited to get into this conversation because when we talk about relationships, it's really relatable to all of us. At one point or another, we were all in some sort of intimate relationship. We have, other types of intimate relationships with family members and friends, etc., as well as intimate partners. So this is going to be a really fantastic conversation that I'm really excited to get into. So let's dive right in. In relation to conflict in relationships, generally speaking, what would you say is the main cause for conflict in relationships?
Well, it's a really interesting question because in it, in the question itself, there's almost a sense of like, why does this happen? It shouldn't be happening. But the reality is, all relationships will always have different levels of conflict. It's inescapable
Mhm.
conflict. So certainly the main reason people give, let's say for coming to couples therapy like they do with me, is because of communication, which is a really broad statement. It's sort of a ubiquitous statement that tells us very little about what's going on, right?
Right.
But that is what most people say and what most people experience. We don't communicate well, which really says, I don't feel heard and understood at the root of it.
Mhm.
Now, there's certainly all different kinds of ways of communicating, but at the heart of it, it's about being heard and understood.
Okay. Fantastic. So you work with couples and individuals to really transform conflict into connection. So really bridging that gap. I'd love for you to share different conflict styles that do exist, just to help the listener understand that not all people essentially communicate or debate in the same manner.
Sure. Yeah. And there's in the work that I do, relational life therapy, we have a way of exploring this to help each person understand what are the behaviors I tend to do when I'm trying to seek connection, when I feel disconnection. Okay. So let me back up a second, if I can, to go into
Yeah.
a little bit more of that first question that you asked with regards to conflict. Every relationship goes through periods of harmony, disharmony, and then repair back to harmony. That's the ideal, right? But what happens is we have disharmony. We know what that looks like. Why didn't you get what you said you were going to pick up at the grocery store? Why didn't you, follow through on what you said you were going to do, or what you just said hurt my feelings? That's disconnection. That's disharmony. And we get stuck in this sort of what I'll call dishonest harmony because we don't know how to repair and actually get back to real harmony.
Mhm.
So simmering resentments end up permeating a relationship because we don't know how to deal with conflict. Our culture doesn't know how to deal with conflict. Our culture teaches us in many different ways that conflict is bad. So, you know, when it comes to different styles of conflict, there can be the person who gravitates towards uh, saying things like, well, if that's how you're going to be, I'm just going to go behind my wall and what you say doesn't matter. And how I feel, what I feel is good and what you say doesn't matter. And so I'm just going to go over here behind my wall. That's one sort of general style, right? Uh, we have a whole grid that we use to help people understand their conflict style. And actually, people can go on my website and take a little quiz, and it'll tell you what your conflict style is. But this grid creates four quadrants and describes the behaviors that come up in those quadrants. So that first one that I was just describing is what we call someone who's walled off and one up, meaning they don't take in what upsets you, right? And so they're like, that doesn't matter. They sort of go behind that kind of wall, and they don't let out feelings that are bothering them. And sometimes it can look like being passive aggressive, being disconnected, acting out, needing to be right, sort of being above the rules.
Okay. Yep.
Okay. So that's one type of uh, conflict style. Another is what we call walled off and one down or love avoidant. This is someone who feels resigned, like their needs and wants don't matter. Why I'm not going to bother taking any action because it's not going to make any difference anyways. They tend to shut down. They may be depressed or behave in depressed ways, and often describe things as helpless, like what I'm going to do. It's not going to make a difference, so why bother? We sort of call this the Eeyore category, right,
Okay.
of conflict. Okay. And then another type of conflict style is someone who is boundaryless and down in shame. I'm sort of going over this in a really quick way. It's not giving the full picture of what these quadrants are, but you can learn that more in a variety of ways, or we can talk a little further about it. But this boundaryless and one down is also what is known as love dependent. This is someone who basically comes across as love me, love me, love me, love me, love me. Please come over here and love me. Come over here and love me. And conflict with them is extremely uncomfortable. They feel uncomfortable in their own skin. They are very needy, thin-skinned, and reactive and desperate. Okay, so those kinds of um, adjectives or how they behave in
Hmm.
conflict. Okay, and then the last one is what we call boundaryless and one up. This is often where people are very angry, self-righteous. They may express things, just whatever comes to their mind, whatever feeling is comes up for them, they just blurt it out. They can be very controlling and aggressive. And so these are sort of the four different types of behaviors and that people get into. And it's all connected to your own sense of self-worth and boundaries, which I teach a lot about through the relational life therapy, which is the modality that I practice and was trained by Terry Real to help couples and to help people come into the center of health when it comes to relating and connecting, because there will always be conflict, but having the skills to manage your own sense of self and boundaries psychologically between you and the other person are essential skills that we need to learn and need to teach in order to do this better.
Amazing. That was such a great overview, and I've made some notes there as you were going along. I've got kind of two questions that have popped up in relation to those specifically. Um, One of them being, how important is it for someone to have this information and understanding and be a better, you know, to be better in conflict, to resolve conflict, manage it in a better way? Like, is understanding these different categories and perhaps where they fit in going to help them be a little bit more solution focused?
Absolutely. Look, knowledge is empowering. And when we can understand our own psychology and how our own psychology is connected to our behaviors and how those behaviors impact our relationships and our partners, it's essential. And the thing is this, most of us download our knowledge about how to be in relationships from the family we grew up in.
Yeah.
Those aren't always the best models.
Yeah.
Aspects of those ways of relating that we want to keep that do work. And then there are aspects that we want to challenge and replace and do differently, do better.
Okay. Yeah. And I'm just curious then too, having done a little bit of work with attachment styles, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. Is it common that people find themselves in relationships one being the opposite of the other when it comes to conflict styles? Or are people that find themselves in relationship having conflict, are they often in the same category? I'm curious about that because I know that with attachment styles, it seems to be that opposites attract, and so I'm curious if conflict styles has the same kind of energy around it in that sense.
In a sense, it's often that two people come together have different conflict styles rather than the same conflict style. Uh, but I wouldn't say that it's a given always. Just like with attachment style, it's not a given always. But um, someone who is walled off, let's say, and sort of goes behind that, isn't expressive and so on, may find themselves really attracted to someone who's much more expressive
Mhm.
and outgoing in that sense. But then when it comes to conflict, if that's how they behave, then it can be problematic.
Yeah,
But
they're polar opposites in a sense,
polar
so it would be
opposites. Yeah,
push and pull and push and pull, and it would make it very challenging.
yeah, yeah. And of course, then what ends up happening is this sort of negative feedback loop where the more one person goes behind that wall, the more the other tries to draw them out. And the more they try and draw them out, love me, love me, love me, the other one goes, oh, this is too much. I can't take this. And further apart they go, right?
Right?
Comes this entrenched cycle.
Yeah, and then you're just kinda caught in that loop then at that point.
And really the work that I do is about let's recognize and understand the pattern that the two of you get into.
Mhm.
And then it becomes us or the two people against the pattern rather than one against the other person.
Mm.
It becomes us against the pattern rather than me against you.
That's beautiful. I love that. That's incredible that you're able to, shed that awareness to the, say couple in question and have them transition kind of their energy and their focus from going at each other to really just resolving, the pattern that keeps coming up. That's incredible. I love
And
this.
the most powerful piece is really once you recognize that pattern and it becomes the two of you against the pattern, you have personal agency, power. Your power is in what's my part of the pattern? How do I contribute to this? Because that's the part I can change.
Mhm. Right, because it's not about changing the other person. It's all the work being done on yourself. Isn't that right?
I wouldn't put it as all, right? Like a lot of the work an individual can do can really shift what goes on in a relationship. So there is that personal accountability. And then, of course, there's also making requests of our partners. Can you
Mhm.
do this differently for me? And and asking in a way that is inviting rather than complaining, in order to help the other person come through for you. And sometimes they will, and sometimes they won't.
Mhm.
But that's part of being in an intimate relationship, right? Is
Yeah.
navigating that.
That's a great example that you just said, and what you just described too is a fantastic segue into the next question that I have for you. But I would love for you to just share a really quick example of what you just mentioned. What was the words that you used instead of complaining, inviting, or what was it that you had said? Sorry.
Yeah, I think I did say inviting. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you're
Making a
asking a
request.
request, making a
It's making a
request as a
request.
yeah. So could you give us like an example of what that would sound like? Like instead of it being a request, kind of with the foundation of complaining about something, more just, like, reaching out in a healthy way.
Sure. I'll give you an example from my own life, right? I may teach this and work with my clients on this, but I live it too, right? I'm in relationships and I have to do the same things I encourage my clients to do. So I'll give you an example of it used to be, I say before I did my own work on becoming my own relational recovery, right? It's similar to sobriety, right?
Right.
Relational recovery. I would, go to my husband's office in our house when I noticed that the dog hadn't been taken out and it was his turn to take the dog out, and I would go in and I would say, "Are you serious? You haven't taken the dog out yet? You do this all the time. Like, really? You're gonna sit here and continue working and the dog is suffering?" Right? That's complaining.
Mhm.
Seriously complaining. So what happens now is we agree to who's going we negotiate. Part of it is negotiating things that work for us. Okay, we agree that the dog will be taken out by 1 o'clock in the afternoon, no matter whose job it is, whose turn it is. And he's going to set alarms for himself so that he remembers to do it when it's his turn. He's human. He's going to make mistakes and get focused on something, whatever. And so now it is that I can go to him and say, "Remember, we had an agreement that you would take her out at 1 o'clock. Can you please follow through for me?" Then it's
Fantastic.
not about arguing over who's taking the dog out and why not and so on and so forth. It's we
Mhm.
had an agreement, please follow through.
Right.
And there's personal accountability there. When you make a great agreements with one another, you do your best to follow through. So,
I love that. It's fantastic. So it's you're setting it up, you're negotiating, you're having a clear conversation and communicating essentially boundaries, I guess, in a way, whether it be, about chores around the house and what have you. So setting that up first, and then it's more of a reminder and like a gentle reminder, I guess would be a good
yeah.
way to put it, as opposed to being frustrated. And yeah, I love that. That's beautiful. That's such a fantastic example. Thank you for sharing that. And so, like I said, that kind of transitions into the next question that I'd love to discuss with you about, speaking up. So now we're starting to communicate these things. When we look at conflict resolution, it's important
Mm,
to be able to speak in a healthy way, as you just provided a fantastic example. What would be another way that that could look, perhaps in a bit of like a heated situation, right? Like that was a little bit more of like an observation of something that hadn't been done, and then you kind of go and bring it to that person's attention. What if it was kind of when the fire's hot, right? And we're heated up, and potentially like emotions are high. Um, how can we practice speaking in a healthy way in those types of scenarios?
yeah. You know, that's the stuff of being human. We get what is commonly referred to as triggered, right? Something will happen and you get this whoosh that comes over you. And the thing is this, it is our work to manage the whoosh, to manage our reactivity. It is not our partners, it's our job.
Mhm.
So if you notice that that whoosh comes over you, that's not the time to have a discussion about anything.
Okay. Yep.
It's time to take a pause. It's time to take a deep breath. Perhaps time to step away for a moment and to do it in a responsible way, not a provocative way. And we teach people how to do this in relational life therapy. This is the main skill. This is the first skill that we all have to build in order to do relationships better, in order to do conflict better, which is the pause, to take a breath.
Mhm.
I don't want to approach this from a reactive place because it's not going to serve me, it's not going to serve us, and I care about the other person. So, the short answer to your question is don't have the conversation then.
Right. Arc it.
Wait and bring it up later, park it. And I teach people how to bring it up later. I
Mhm.
have a whole format for doing that. Um,
Fantastic. Great. And then when it comes to speaking up as well, we had a bit of a conversation in the pre-interview, and you said that there are four main fears that people have when speaking up that essentially prevents them from doing so. So I'd love for you to take us through what those four fears are, and kind of how they show up.
yeah. For those of us who tend to shy away from saying what's on our minds, saying what we need, saying how we feel, these are the main fears that tend to come up, especially from those of us who are disempowered in some way. We feel like the other person has more power in the relationship, and power dynamics are real. So the first fear is that the other person will blow up. They'll get angry, and we fear that.
Mhm.
We fear that the other person will leave if we bring up how we feel, if we bring up our own feelings. We fear that the other person will fall apart, that they can't handle it, and so we're protective of them by
Mhm.
not bringing up our own feelings and needs. And then the fourth is that we fear we're wrong. We fear that our perspective, our feelings, our needs are inaccurate, partly at times because the other person sees it differently. So we question ourselves, don't have that strong sense of our own worth, our own perspective as valid. And those four things really keep people from bringing things up. And so
Yep, and I can only assume how detrimental that is to, a relationship if things aren't being discussed out of fear of all these things that you just mentioned, that there's not really any forward motion in that situation. There's no resolution.
there's no forward motion. Again, there's no skill for repairing things. And those of us who silence ourselves in that way, it's literally killing people with
Right.
physical disorders and so on. Um, because it all gets held inside and those emotions go somewhere.
Mhm.
It's healthy to get those things out. It's healthy to bring up feelings and needs and to face the fears and to experience, wait a minute, no, he can handle it. They can handle it. And uh, to learn to come through that.
Mhm, and are there techniques and tools and strategies that you use, with your clients in your private sessions or perhaps in your workshop as well, which we'll talk about a little bit later on, that teaches people how to overcome these fears or different ways to maybe, express themselves, different ways to communicate, different, approaches that they can take if verbally speaking up, for example, is, like, too debilitating?
Well, a lot of it is teaching a sense of connection to their own sense of self.
Okay.
So, for example, one technique that is helpful is when you're feeling that fear of, oh my gosh, I can't bring this up because he's just going to get so upset or she's going to just get so upset I can't bring it up. Take that pause, right? There it is again. We have to take a pause. Recognize I'm feeling that whoosh. I'm feeling those that reactivity and literally use your breath to bring yourself down from it, to regulate your nervous system. And I like to teach people to put their hand on their heart as they take this breath
Mhm.
and remind themselves, I can handle this. I've got this. Because some of that fear is coming from a younger part of themselves or past experiences of not being safe, not being able to handle it. But now they're more resourced. They're adults, they're more resourced, they have more skills, they may have more support, especially when they're working with a therapist and a relational life therapist, like the work that I do. Putting your hand on your heart, I've got this, I can handle this.
Fantastic. Yeah,
It
so
may be simple, but it's very powerful.
mhm, bit of self-soothing.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
I love that strategy, and so easy to do, right? And it only takes a moment. Mm. Well, we talked a little bit earlier about attachment styles and having you take us through the different conflict styles from what I know about attachment styles, which isn't a whole lot, like, I'm definitely not an expert on those, but I did notice some kind of crossover and some similarities. But we did have a chat about attachment styles in our prior conversation, and you have a different perspective to share on this that's a little bit different
Mhm.
to most. So I'd love for you to share that perspective that you have on attachment styles and how
Sure.
we view those.
So my different view is not so much on the attachment styles themselves. The research in that is very clear, it's very powerful, it's very real. Where I differ is oftentimes people talk about attachment styles with the expectation that their partner is responsible for interacting with them in a way because of their attachment style.
Right.
Okay. And the way I differ around that is it's not our partner's job, it's our job. Relationships are not safe. That's the just harsh reality. Relationships are not safe. And so a lot of the talk, look, it's TikTok talk, it's Instagram talk. This is where you see, like, oh, it should be making each other safe, or it's the other person's responsibility to make you safe. No, relationships aren't safe. They are inherently risky. The best we can do is make them relatively safe.
Mm,
That's a quote directly from my mentor, Terry Real. You can't be in a relationship and have the expectation that it will be made perfectly safe. We have to learn ourselves to manage our emotions when we experience the risk of asking for something, which may be a need that we have, you know, and our partner not being able to come through for you. I'll give you an example. I
sure.
had a client long ago who was a verbal processor, an external processor, right? And so she would come home and just oh, dump every thought, feeling, and emotion and experience that she'd had of her day. And her partner said, I can't always be there to hear that. Like, it, I, we need a different way to do this.
Mhm.
And part of the work was helping her recognize that though this was how she processed things, it was a reasonable request that her partner was having, saying, I can't always do that. I can sometimes, but I can't always do that. And for her to deal with the disappointment, the grief that comes with my partner not being able to come through on everything for me. It's an unrealistic expectation.
Mhm.
And to find other ways respectfully within the relationship to uh, process the way she needs to process. Call a friend,
Yeah.
right? Go for a walk, talk into a tape recorder, let it all out.
Mhm.
But her partner can have limits and boundaries too.
Yeah.
So sometimes what happens is people start to become what we call the victim of their own psychology. Okay. Because I am a verbal processor, I have to do this. And so the people around me have to accommodate it. That's not how relationships work. That's not how healthy relationships work. You can do things to support each other, you can do things to support yourself, but the reality is our partners can't be everything we need them to be, and there is grief when it comes to that, and we need to learn to manage our own grief around those things that they can't do for us, and without it destroying the relationship. Whenever
Right.
possible, there are times when relationships should end and choose to end. There's too many things this person can't provide for me, and so it's not good for me to be here. I end the relationship, that's fine. But that's a decision that is often made too lightly when there really are ways and skills to learn to manage these things.
Yeah, so there's kinda 2 sides to the coin there where it's like many times relationships, seem to end, you know, there's adversity in the relationship, so people are very quick to leave, versus actually sticking it out, facing their stuff, having these tough conversations, having understanding and awareness, and actually seeing it through. There's kinda, you have kinda 2 sides to the coin there, and that's a great segue where I'd like the conversation to go. We talk about, in a new relationship, we discussed prior that there's so much love in the beginning and there's stages that develop through that, but people are quick to turn away when things get difficult, especially when you're, perhaps dating and you're out there meeting different people. But you made a comment that's struck me as very interesting. You said that when things start to get difficult, that is really where the actual marriage begins. I'd love for you to explain a little bit more about what you mean by that.
Sure. So the honeymoon phase that everyone is aware of when you first get into a relationship or even first marry uh, is also known as love without knowledge. Okay. All the flaws that your partner has that bump up against you, that you don't like, that are they're not we're not seeing them. There's this haze around us, right?
Yeah.
Because of all the newness, because of all the excitement, because of all the curiosity that we have. It's like our brains are built that way. There's a reason it's like that.
Mhm.
But that settles over time and shifts into a phase of what we call knowledge without love. It's when you wake up and you look at the other person, you go, oh my gosh, what did I get myself into? I have to tolerate this for the rest of my life? Yeah, that's the stuff of marriage.
Mhm.
That's what it is. Now, everybody can reach their limit and the stuff they're dealing with, they can decide, you know, we call it a relational reckoning, where you get to sometimes get to the point of, am I getting enough from this relationship such that what I'm not getting is worth it? Okay.
Mhm.
But back to what I was saying before, our relationships are not going to meet all of our needs. And so some of it is learning to ac- accept that, some realistic acceptance, and learning to negotiate with one another. How do we manage these differences that we have such that we can both live with this?
Mhm.
So again, it becomes us against the problem rather than us against each other.
Right. And of course, this is gonna be on such an individual, person to person basis, but and you kind of just described it there a little bit, but I'd like to kind of go a little bit further on that. I mean, how do you kind of make the decision? Now we're practicing, our decision making skills and our awareness, having the knowledge and understanding of, okay, these are the pros and cons of kind of this relationship and this person. These are the things I love. These are the things I don't love. I mean, where's the line in the sand with, continuing to work on it, even though, of course, it's not perfect? Because as you said, no relationship is. Um, Knowing that and then having, our boundaries kind of crossed. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if I'm explaining myself properly, but it's like, so there's conflict in the relationship. At what point do we make the decision that, okay, yes, I'm going to work on this and it is worth it and I'm going to continue and I'm going to seek help and I'm going, we will seek help. We will make the decision to negotiate and to understand each other versus maybe the cons outweigh the pros and actually like it is probably best to leave this relationship. I mean, that can be, people can be on the fence for a while, I think, kind of on either
People can be on the
side.
fence for a lifetime.
Right.
People can climb up on that fence and be there for a lifetime. It's not an easy thing that we're talking about.
Yeah.
But one of the things, there's the greater uh, view as well. There's sort of pulling out, how does this impact others around me? It's not just about me,
Hmm.
right? Um, Commitments that are made often drive people to stay. I made a commitment, so I'm going to stay. I don't encourage anybody to stay in a relationship where there's abuse, of course. That's a
Mhm.
whole other, we could have a whole other discussion about that. Um, but there's, um, it's not an easy answer, and it is often helpful to have a therapist
Yeah.
working with you to help you figure that out. Uh, and only you can decide, right? No one else can decide that for you. Each person has to decide that for themselves. So I wish I had a simpler answer, straightforward. Oh, you do this. This is how you
Yeah.
decide. If this is happening, then this is no, that there's nuance here. This
Yeah.
is a gray area. We like to put things in boxes. We like to make things black or white, and that gets us in trouble all the time.
Yes. Yes, it does. Well, some very powerful questions, though, that you just described, of kind of self reflection and things to ask ourselves and things to look at. Um, all throughout this conversation, there's been so many great takeaways, so many things to reflect on and digest. You are working in real life, you're doing a workshop coming up where you share all of your expertise and your strategies and all of these examples and scripts that you shared with us here today, of course, in more depth. It's a 2-day relationship skills boot camp in Annapolis, Maryland, and that's coming up mid-October, the 19th and the 20th. I'd love for you to share a little bit more about your boot camp and what people get from going through participating in the boot camp. What is the outcome? And this is something that you do on a regular basis as well, is it? Or this is a one-off boot camp?
We do this twice a year.
Okay.
And so if you miss this one, you got to wait till 2025. This is the last one of this year. Uh, and we teach you the skills. We teach you the skills of how to manage conflict. We teach you the skills of connection to yourself. Like I mentioned before briefly about self-esteem and boundaries. We talk a lot about that.
Hmm.
Uh, and help you learn to navigate conflict in a much healthier way because it's inevitable, it's going to be there. And so rather than simmering in dishonest harmony, we help you move into true intimacy where both people have a voice and feel seen and heard. That's the goal, that's the outcome to work towards. But look, I'm not saying that come to this boot camp and automatically once you finished, you're going to have all of these things perfectly. No, this is a an ongoing type of work. You will
Yeah.
learn the essentials at the boot camp and have that to take with you to
Yeah.
continually work on, just like a yoga practice or just like a exercise routine, right? It's something you're constantly doing, refining, getting stronger at, uh, and so on. So,
Yeah, a practice. So the foundations are there and then it's up to the individual to go and implement those. And this is not just for couples as well, is that correct?
correct. It's for couples, individuals. Yeah, you can come by yourself, you can come with your partner, you can bring a friend, uh, and there's a discount for coming with somebody rather than coming alone. But all of that information is available on their website. So I'd love to see some of your listeners attend.
Fantastic. Yeah. And, if this is resonating you, if the conversation that we had here today is resonating with you, I highly encourage you to reach out, head over to the website. You can contact Risa directly if you have any questions about the workshop, and your registration link is all there on the web page. Any final thoughts, Risa, before we wrap up, and any other ways of contact that people can find you if you're active on any other social media sites, etc.
Sure. Yeah, you can find me. My website is togethercouplescounseling.com, and that's my handle on Instagram as well, Together Couples Counseling, and Facebook as well. Um, but the thing that I hope all of your listeners come away with is that it is our relationships that matter most in our lives.
Hmm.
And so learning to do them better is essential, and it will improve your health, improve your longevity. So it matters and it's worth it investing in it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you so much for taking the time to have a conversation with me here today. Like I said, very powerful, so many takeaways and some incredible things for people to start implementing right away and some strategies for them to start practicing. So thank you. I really appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me. It's fun to chat with you.